So, as we have clearly seen, the constructor in superclass is not available to subclass if subclass is having a constructor. That's what we have seen here. But how can we make use of it? Because we can go for creating another method which is a super method. So, we can access the constructor in the superclass also. Right? So, let's go for that. So, I'll just keep the above things as commented so that we can easily understand, because I don't want to see every result. So for that purpose, what I do is I just always keep the above cells as comment. So it will be easy for us to refer the output. So now let's understand how we can use it, because any constructor in the written the superclass is not available to subclass if subclass is having constructor. So first I'll write that point. Any class or any constructor in superclass is not available to subclass if subclass has a constructor. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't write. Make it simple. We can write, but we should use some special things like using super method. I'll just give the syntax also. Any constructor in superclass is not available to subclass if subclass has a constructor. To subclass if subclass is having a constructor. If subclass has a constructor, because that's where the constructor overriding is happening. Even we have defined two methods with the same name, because if we want to modify the existing behavior of a constructor or a method, we need to call the superclass constructor. So that's where we'll use a super built-in method, because if you write super, the color is changing to violet color. That means it's a built-in method. So first let's understand the syntax for it and we'll work on the same example, because super method is useful to call superclass constructor or methods from subclass. So it is useful to call superclass constructors or methods from the subclass. It is useful to call superclass constructors or even methods. We'll take couple of examples. First we'll read on the previous example and then we'll go for another example. That's where you'll be making it simple. So now we can just go for using it, whether we call only superclass constructor or we call superclass constructor and pass arguments into it, or we can go for superclass method only. We have multiple syntaxes. So I'll just keep this triple quotes and I pass superclass method can be super method can be used as, so super of the first thing you define dunder in it. That is nothing but you are calling only superclass constructor, right? So that is the syntax for it. So you call only superclass constructor if you want to call only superclass constructor, or else even if you want to call superclass constructor and pass arguments into it, yes, you can do it. So dunder in it. So dunder in it, that's what we are going to see now, because I wanted to access the arguments also. We call superclass constructor. We are calling superclass constructor and we are passing arguments to it. That's what we are doing now. We need to do. So now the other thing is you can directly pass the method also, super dot method. That is, we are calling superclass method. We will see that example also, so that it will be familiar for you and you can start working on it. So this is the syntax, or this is how we can go for usage of superclass method, because super method, sorry, it's not superclass, it is super method. Super method is a built-in method which is useful to call superclass constructors or methods from the subclass. Make it very simple. So you should not just club with this any methods or classes. Make it very simple. Now what do I do is I try to call superclass constructor in the subclass using super method. I try to call superclass constructor because that's my comment over there. I need to call the superclass constructor in the subclass by using super method. So let's go for it, how that could happen. So first I'll write the same father class. So I'll just give my first comment here is accessing base class, because I already know that here father is superclass and son is, child is, or son is the base class. So accessing base class constructor in subclass. So first we'll declare class of father obviously. Then we define a constructor. So when you are defining constructor here, just observe clearly. So I'll write demo of super method. That is a doc string. You can give your own thing. So define, I define dunder init here. So first thing, obviously, I also create another object called as property, because property is also a built-in method. You can just give it as property underscore, so that even you can access it, but just don't confuse with the colors over there. So I declare property underscore is equal to 0. I am assigning a simple value so that I could access it, because I just wanted to make sure that I declare the superclass constructor and I wanted to send property value, because if I want to send the property value to the superclass constructor, the variable should differ, right? So that is the reason I am making it as property underscore and I am initializing with 0. So you just declare self dot property underscore is equal to property, or whatever you define here. So self dot property underscore, so that even because property is a built-in method, so you did not confuse over that, because built-in methods can also be used as variables. You can just try yourself, you'll understand. But keywords cannot be used as variables, right? So I define a method here. I define the method as display property, because I wanted to access both properties now. That is the reason I'll use a super method here. So define display property of self, obviously, and I want to print the result. My result should be father property. So father's property is equal to comma self dot property. So father's property is self dot property. Now, so same in the same program, what we have done, we have defined son of father, but now what I try to do is I do the same thing, but I add a super method over there. That's where I want to access the superclass constructor in the subclass. So I define class of son of father, and now I define my constructor again here with two parameters, because I wanted to just make sure they are property 1 and the above property, where we create an object or instance of subclass and we pass two values so that we can access the result. But when is that possible? When we use super method only. So I'll prove it. So define dunder init method and pass self, comma, you declare another thing which is property underscore 1, because you see whenever you gave property over there, it is able to give you the search pattern over there. So property underscore 1. So assign it to some default value, because there if you wanted to initialize directly, we can do it, but I want to take it from user. That is the reason I am defining some dummy values over there. So property underscore is equal to 0. There you go. Now clearly you can see some difference when you execute the result, but only when you use super method here, because simply when we pass, because we are trying to send property value to superclass constructor. That is where we just define. How do we define? We use the same syntax which we have declared above. We write super method. We declare super method dot, and I just define the dunder init, and I want to pass the arguments, right? We'll be using the, sorry, here I did not define the arguments, right? You should declare the arguments in it, then only you can pass. So this is superclass, call superclass constructor, and here we are declaring arguments here. That's what it missed, sorry for that. And here we'll call superclass method. So now if you don't declare over there, obviously you cannot access it. So now I want to send the property to it. So that is where I define property underscore. It's not property, because this property underscore is from the superclass constructor, because we are calling superclass constructor and passing argument, because if you don't pass it here, it's wrong. By mistake I did not mention it there above, but if you don't pass arguments, it's wrong. You should realize it, because in sometimes I'll be testing you whether you're following it or not, because it's a self page, you can access anytime. So that's where no need to worry whenever you see such things, but only make sure whether you are following it or not, because you try your way, because that's where you learn. So here I am sending property value to the superclass constructor. I am sending property underscore value to the superclass constructor. So let's see whether it is accessed or not. How do you see that? So first you just define self dot to access the object which is defined in Sun class, self dot property underscore 1 is equal to property underscore 1, because we will pass the values when we create an object. That is, we create a subclass instance and we want to display the methods. So I define one method. Whether you take same method or not, it's up to you, because already overriding is happening. We are just modifying it. So define, that is display property, and now let's try to see the results, because here I want to print total property, not the child property, because I want to use both the properties. Now father has given completely to child here. So total property of child is equal to, so how do I access that? I just define self dot property underscore 1, that is from the Sun class, with self dot property underscore, that is from the parent. Let's see whether we can do it or not. So first you create a subclass instance where with the Sun class only, not with the father class. Creating a subclass instance. So I define E is equal to Sun, and first let's see the directory. Always do in that way only, you can access it very clearly. Define, directory of E. Very good. You are accessing property underscore 1 and display property. Let's see. When you go for E dot property, what do you see over there? 0, because obviously did not pass any object, any values to it, right? Very good, because we have defined it as default. So E dot property underscore 1 is also 0, and when you display it, 0 plus 0 will be obviously 0 only, because we are not passing anything here. Sun object has no attribute self underscore property, self dot property underscore. Very good. Why? Because here what we have defined, display property. So self dot property is equal to property underscore, which we have defined as 0, and here we are making self comma property underscore 1 equal to 0 property underscore, and here we are accessing it with the superclass method, and we are not passing any values over here, right? Because self dot property underscore we have defined. Did we define here? No, right? That's the mistake. So always read from the mistakes only, and you execute once again. You see the directory of it, and same. So E dot property, that will be 0 because we have defined it as 0, and E dot property underscore 1 we have defined in Sun class, it is also 0, and D dot display property, and that should result it as total property of child is 0 plus 0, because previously why we didn't get, because in superclass constructor we have defined as self dot property. If you define property underscore over there, you can see. But now what I want to say is, I want to pass some values to it, because here already we have defined some default values. What happens if I pass something like f is equal to Sun of, now I want to pass property value for Sun and property value for parent. That means I define property underscore 1 is for the Sun, right? So I define it as 2 lakhs. 2 lakhs for Sun and 8 lakhs for father. Now I should see the result of 10 lakhs, right? Let's see. So I define directory of f. Obviously you get the same result, and when you go for f dot property underscore 1, you should fetch 2 lakhs. Very good, because you have defined the value for this. It is clearly accessible. Now let's see whether we can access property from the parent class. So property, even you can just give dot and wait for suggestion, you could see the result. F dot property, there you go, 8 lakhs. Very good. Now you can display the property. So clearly with the help of super method, you are able to see the constructor declared in the superclass also. Total property of child is 10 lakhs. So because only with the help of superclass method, and we are passing arguments here. What happens if we don't pass the arguments here? You see, when you can just remove this, and execute it again. And I just go for directory of f. Display. So f dot property underscore 1. First let's see the result. Very good, 2 lakhs. And for the property of the father, you should see 8 lakhs. But what you're getting only 0. Why? Because you're not accessing the value declared in the son class, because you are not passed the arguments into the super method. So that is where you can see the difference. What happens when you pass arguments and what happens when you don't pass the arguments. So always try yourself and make it simple. So that is how we are able to access the constructor declared in the superclass into the subclass by using super method. So that is where we have taken super method by calling superclass constructor with and passing arguments. Now let's take one more example and how we can access base class constructor and method in the subclass. So we just need to go for the third syntax. So I have taken about first two and let's see the third syntax also. So I'll just keep the things in comment because I'll be writing another program where I'll be taking the example of a simple thing like taking area of square and area of rectangle. I wanted to just access the base class constructor and the method where I passed the arguments and I just wanted to see it by passing only method name. So I just write, I want to create a Python program to access both base class constructor along with method. Here already we are accessing with the same method name, but what I do is I just change the, without writing constructor here, I just directly use the method name. So super dot method. I just wanted to call only superclass method. That's what I just wanted to explain so that you can work on your own example. Constructor and method in subclass. So for that, I'll be taking a general examples of square, rectangle areas so that it will be something like realistic. Let's start another program where we wanted to calculate the area of square and rectangle. Here, we'll be writing a square class with one instance variable x and we calculate the area of square, where if we want to add another value to it, because for square you have only one side, you just, four sides into a square, 4 sides will become a square, all sides are equal, obviously, right? So when you go for rectangle, you have length and breadth. So let's use the same logic here. I define class of square and I write demo 3 or whatever, it's up to you. Now we define the dunder in it. So define dunder in it and I pass self comma x, because for square I can need all sides are equal, I can just pass one value since x can be used to calculate the area of square. So I just take it from input, that is self dot x is equal to x. In the same way, but in the above example what we have done, we have assigned the value, but here I am just taking self dot x is equal to x and I define the method to display the result by calculating area. So define area of self and I just define print area. So print of area of square. So area of square is equal to, because you need to see all the syntax, all the things in super method, because super method calling directly superclass constructor or calling superclass constructor and passing arguments we have seen in above example. Now we'll be using only understanding how to call superclass method. So for that I have taken this example. So area of square is equal to, what is area of square? It is side square, right? So I just define it and now I pass self dot x into self dot x. Obviously self is some kind of reference which I have clearly mentioned about how do we use self. Fine. So that is square class, but how do you make it as parent class? When you use class another name where I would like to take now rectangle class and I define square in it. So that's how this becomes a child class and the above one becomes a parent class. Now obviously the value of x is inherited. Now I create another class rectangle derived from the square, where if I want to calculate the area of rectangle, we need to pass two values, right? So I just define dunder in it. I just define dunder in it and I pass self as a first argument to it and I want to have two objects, right? So obviously x is inherited here. So what I can do is I can pass super method to call superclass constructor along with passing arguments. What is argument you want to use? X. Very good. But you need to declare one more object, right? That is self dot y is equal to y. Very good. In this example, the first thing we have used, calling superclass constructor and passing the argument from superclass. So I can directly use x here. Now I'll declare another method which is area, so that I wanted to access the area. So for that we have declared a x and y. In this program what we can do, we can class superclass constructor and passing x value, that is passing argument. We can also call superclass method, right? So what I do is I just define, because area of rectangle is different and area of square is different. So define area of self and I just define print. Before using print, what you need to make it? You need to use the super method to call superclass method, that is super dot area. That is where we are calling superclass method. I'll tell you what happens if we remove this once I execute. Calling superclass method. So now I can just give print area of rectangle. So area of rectangle, I can make it as, area of rectangle, that is length into breadth, that is self dot x into self dot y, self dot x into self dot y, because we are already taking x from the superclass, that's what we have defined in the above, and self dot x and self dot y. Now when you execute this, so first you are not declaring inputs here, you can take from the user also, that's what we'll do now. So find areas of rectangle and square, that is our target. Find areas of rectangle and square. So take input from user, that is x comma y or a comma b, anything you can take. You can take multiple inputs from user, right? How do you take? You can use map method or comprehension. I want to take float or input, it's up to you whether it is float or integer. So float of x, for x in, take input from user, input of enter 2 values, because I should convey user that what I am trying to ask him. So enter 2 values and I should just tell him he should split commas. That's what comprehension we have seen. Now when I execute this, when I take input from user, I can see a by 2 values. So what I do is I just pass object r is equal to rectangle of, what I need to mention here? I need to mention both the things, right? So r is equal to rectangle of a comma b. Let's save it and execute. Enter 2 values, 5 comma 2, name error rectangle, because it's a syntax mistake, right? That is name error. I did not define as rectangle. Fine, no issues. 5 comma 2. Okay, now I just make it directory of, what is the object we have defined here? R. There you go, directory of R. You could see r dot x will be 5.0 because we have taken the first value as 5, and r dot y will be 2.0 because we have converting it into float, because we have taken float of x. You can take integer as input, it converts into float, or float automatically in float only. How do you access the area? So when you give r dot area, you see what do you get? String object has no attribute self. That means we have given mistake over there in syntax. It's fine because you got the area over there. So area of rectangle is, what did you get over there? It's 5 into 2, 10. If you are getting 10, you are not getting as, you are not mentioning it as square. You just gave it as multiplication. So it is giving you string object has no attribute self. That means in the syntax only we are making it wrong, because that's where we gave here dot. That is a blunder mistake. You should just see when you are writing, when you use dot, you should go for formatting over there. Now when I execute it once again, when I save and when I take same input from user 5 comma 2 and I last directory of r, should see when you go for r dot x, you got 5.0, r dot y, very good. And when you go for r dot area, should see the area of rectangle, because you have given r is equal to rectangle of a comma b, right? So now let's see whether we are able to access it clearly or not. Area of square is 25, area of rectangle. You see, in the above example, you got only area of square. You are not getting area of rectangle because you gave dot. But here 5 2s are 10 is area of rectangle, area of square is 25.0, a side square and length into breadth, That's what in the above example we got area of square, but for area of rectangle we gave dot. That's in the syntax mistake, right? So I always make you to learn from errors, whether it is my typo error or anything, but make sure I just make it intention to make only you understand. So here we have done understood in two ways. We are calling superclass method with the arguments along with superclass method also. We are accessing area method, so you can directly use it. Instead of even method overriding is happening here, we are avoiding it or we are modifying it by using super method and passing arguments, and we are calling super method along with superclass. We are calling superclass method. We are using superclass method, superclass constructor along with arguments. Make it simple. Our intention is to call superclass constructor or methods from subclass. So that's what we have seen. In the first example, we have taken how we call superclass constructor, and we have seen along with arguments also. Here we have taken, we are calling superclass constructor and we are passing argument x into rectangle class, and also we are calling superclass method because we have defined same area, right? What happens if you define the area is different? Now we execute this, enter two values. You just need to practice yourself 5, 2. Now just go for directory of R. You see area and areas. Now when you go for r dot x 5.0, r dot y 2.0, and first let's try to call the method in the rectangle class. So you just need to give r dot areas, right? When you go for r dot areas, what you got? You are getting both the results because already you have defined super. You are calling superclass method in it, and when you go for r dot area, you will be getting area of square. See, if you change the method name, you are getting the same result, but for areas method you are already calling superclass method, so obviously this result is again being called over there. So that is not needed to pass another method name if you are using super method, because with super method only we are calling superclass method and we are also calling superclass constructor and passing argument. So just make it very simple, practice yourself, and this is very, very important, how we can override the superclass constructors and make them access in the subclass constructor by using super method.